has value, later on in life.
I can see that, with this group, maybe it's better to start off with a prototyping board, which is basically a board that is already designed, but it has interesting components like, an LCD display, buttons and connectors to hook up to motors and some other devices. So that way, the club can focus only on or mostly on the software aspect of an embedded system instead of having to deal with the design of the circuit board and whatnot.
That's what we're going to do tomorrow. That's what we're going to do tomorrow.
It's interesting to do the entire thing, I can tell you that much. It's very gratifying to start from, selecting the components all the way, finishing up the software and actually seeing the thing work in the application where this thing belongs to. By the way, this is the brain of a smoking machine. A smoking machine, yes, a machine that literally smokes cigarettes. The usual stuff that, people do around here.
I agree.
So are there any questions? Any comments? Anything that you guys want me to kind of go over, explain?
Not at the moment. Just gotta let it sink in.
Did you solder everything by hand, or did you?
Yes, I hand solder everything.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I have one of those, magnifying hood.
Yeah.
It's not like magnifying glass. This is like a hood, so it will be hands-free.
Yeah.
It's like a 2.5x, 2.5 times magnifying hood, so I can still leave about this much distance between me and the component I'm soldering. I use a pair of tweezers to hold the component. My general rule of thumb to my UC Davis students is, if the pair of tweezers does not hurt when you try to poke yourself with it, it's not sharp enough. That's the kind of tweezers that I use to pick up the components. Because the resistors on these things is so small, it is smaller than a piece of sesame. If you sneeze when you're soldering and you have components not soldered, you will lose a few at least. But it's all fun. Surface mount soldering is not as hard as most people think it is. It's actually in a way easier than through-hole soldering. Especially for desoldering. Try to desolder the through-hole parts, it's a nightmare. So, it's up to you guys, to, where you want to go. I can see there's some interest here. And you don't have to make this a project for the club. If you look at this and say, oh, this is kind of the stuff that I want to learn, you can look into computer engineering and also electrical engineering, when you plan to transfer. Because, those programs typically will get closer to the hardware side, to deal with this sort of thing. So basically, I just want to, expose, everybody to, the others, quote unquote, the other side of business instead of, just writing code in software, using Visual Basic and all that. There's an entire different side of computer engineering, from circuit board design to embedded systems. They're all very interesting. At least to me, they're all very interesting.
Pretty much anytime there's a PC controlling another device, there's a board like this or another board that's programmed by a programmer that does something. Like in the real world, like I work in an arcade, right? And inside every video game, you have the PC which runs the video game. There's an input-output board, right? So the entire programmers, that's all they do is do this embedded programming, and it all is actually taking inputs and outputs and processing. So it's kind of a different. Everybody thinks PC programming. Every device you have is programmed to do something other than run by a PC.
Well, since we're on this topic, I got to show you this because personally, I think it is very interesting. Okay, I'll just kind of give you a brief overview of what it is. Stuxnet is basically a worm. It infected the Windows 7 systems. So, people would say, yeah, what is the big deal? Well, it infected, some of the nuclear plant controller PCs, in Iran. Okay, that thing does happen, right? Worms are non-discriminate. They will attack any computer. Not this one. This one targets industrial control systems. Okay, it will leave your regular PC alone. It won't do a single thing. but when it gets onto one of these, industrial control PCs, it will identify the industrial control system and say, aha, this is prime target. And what it does is not just infecting the PC itself, it would also use the program to send out instructions to reprogram all the PLCs throughout the control system. PLCs are individual tiny little computers like the embedded controller that I'm talking about. So they are responsible to control a specific item on the factory floor or nuclear plant in this case. So this particular worm will not only infect the PC running Windows, but it will also send instructions to reprogram the PLCs, that are actually used to control the devices. With a nuclear plant like this, you can kill the PC and everything will keep running just fine, because the individual PLCs are completely independent and they can talk to each other and keep everything up and running. The PC is nothing more than an interface to monitor and also to change parameters if you need to change parameters. But as far as the control system is concerned, the PC is entirely unnecessary. So this particular worm would go to the heart of the entire thing. It would reprogram the PLCs. In other words, if you have one PLC to control the cooling system of a nuclear plant, it will reprogram that thing and say, don't do anything. You can turn it off. Or the boron rods, of a nuclear plant that controls the reaction rate, it can just say, it's okay. Extract all the boron rods, we don't need those. And you have a meltdown. So it's very interesting how this one, was specifically targeting control systems, and how Iran is the only country that that was infected by this particular worm.
You think that some independence to this, or you think this is still with it?
Most people agree. You have to read the rest of it. It used all the known security holes of Windows 7 that are published, plus 4 zero-day exploits. Okay, for any type of worm or virus to come up with 4 zero-day exploits is unheard of. Symantec, said basically this is unheard of. This is like, wow. Even Symantec, who has seen many of the viruses and worms, haven't seen anything like this. So whoever was behind this, is very unlikely to be like a single person or even a group of people. Iran implied that it has to be a country behind this. Yep. So it has to be a country that does not like Iran too much and yet bold enough to do something like that. All I can say is, good thing it did not happen to us.
It has happened to us. It has happened to us.
Not hitting a nuclear plant.
We crashed the whole military server for like 2.5, 3 weeks. Entire countries have entire branches of their military where all they do is programming and hacking and deviant crap. Like it's a known thing that they actually talk about during briefings. They worry about it because we don't really do it. Like we don't officially do it. We don't condone it. But other countries, like China's come out and said, this is part of our warfighting strategies. Where if we went to war, they would actually make viruses and crash them. Same thing in Korea too.
They may have viruses already planted,
yes.
Because all those will remain submerged until the day they are needed. Yep.
It's kind of weird when you start thinking about it.
It's a level playing field when it comes to computer security. It doesn't matter whether you have the best plans to manufacture stuff out of platinum or whatever. Because all it takes is a few computers and smart people, which is also something the club can also look into. Is computer security stuff,
Yeah, that's something, guys.
That's cool. So I don't know what you guys want to do, like for next week, because I'm completely open. I can talk about, stuff related to what we just talked about today. Or we can, you guys can decide what you want to do.
I think we should get together.
Off the top of my head, I can't think of anything. But I mean, that's what we have the forums for. And you're like, oh man, this is a good idea. Just put it on there. personally, I like the working with the software side of it.
Mm-hmm.
Just the PCB design and layout just seems like miles beyond like what I might actually be capable of understanding right now. I don't know how to do that.
The software side's cool. The software side of C, you go here in all the classes like C's a high level assembly language, and then when you start actually like writing code to this stuff, you start seeing why it's a high level assembly language. That's kind of cool. Because this stuff, I deal with electronics every day. I learn all that stuff. It's stuff I have a knowledge of, but it's not something that I'm gonna need to know how to do until probably a year from now. Not something really major. But as far as the software side of aspects, there's a programming code. It's a valid part of programming.
I think I'd be more interested in kind of working towards like an actually attainable final product, instead of like spending a year trying to learn kind of the schematics of what I'm looking at.
Yep.
That's just how I think about it.
We do have maybe something about software craftsmanship or software craftsmanship. So it's just getting us better at programming in a way that is scalable. Let's say something like design patterns or these things, and not all of them, maybe one or two. I think we looked up some of that because a lot of us probably know a little bit of coding, probably. Overall, everybody code at least can see that a little bit. Yeah, a lot of people can do that. So I think it's easy for us to relate everything to C, and work from there, whatever we're in.
I like your suggestion about computer security. That'd be kind of interesting.
So we do have ethical hacking here in the class.
Yeah, but ethical hacking here is does not touch on the programming side. If you guys want to touch on security, one place you can get started off with is website security, which is actually the biggest problem of them all. Is people who are writing the PHP scripts behind websites do not understand enough about securities, so they will let SQL queries to be injected into the parameters, and then they will be executed along with the intended MySQL statements. But the end result is, you can trick a website or web script to display a lot more than what it's supposed to. So SQL code injection is a big deal. So, and that's one big, huge security hole in many web applications.
So what prior programming skills do you need to...
You need to know a little bit about PHP and maybe a little bit about MySQL. But if you look up SQL injection and PHP, you can probably find tutorials and examples, like lots of those on the internet.
Along that line, there's a site called hackthesite.org, and it's basically a site just set up so that you can hack it. It gives you challenges, and it gives you an input box that says Sam stored this password in a text file on the server, and in the comments it says this is the password file, so sometimes teaches you how to look at the service.
I would access that website initially with a live DVD. Well, that's why that's why people who teach hacking, the target of the hack is also something that they wrote. So they're not hacking somebody else's program; they're hacking their own program, for demonstration purposes.
It's more for for security. If you're doing something, you want to know how you would, screw it up so you make it, secure.
Okay. Who knows that?
So that's a possibility too. We can have some people to write very simple examples, like bad examples of PHP scripts, and then illustrate how to inject SQL query statements into it, so that your web page